There were more strikes on Islamic State targets in Syria today. This amateur video is believed to show one of them. After today's Commons vote, the RAF is now expected to join the attacks over the weekend, but only on targets inside Iraq. David Cameron told MPs the Islamic State forces were a threat Britain could not ignore.
Left unchecked, we will face a terrorist caliphate on the shores of the Mediterranean and bordering a NATO member with a declared and proven determination to attack our country and our people. This is not the stuff of fantasy. It is happening in front of us, and we need to face up to it.
After negotiations with the coalition behind the scenes, the Labour leader Ed Miliband brought the vast bulk of his party on side. But a vocal minority of MPs challenged the Prime Minister that even with this limited action proposed today, he was at risk of repeating the mistakes of the past.
Two questions he's not put to himself. How long will this war last, and when will mission creep start?
This is going to be a mission that will take not just months, but years. But I believe we have to be prepared for that commitment.
ISIS indeed are made up of murderous psychopaths. That's not the issue. We know that. Iraq, Afghanistan, in this government, Libya, none are success stories. Are we going to embark on action that could last for years?
The fact is, this is about psychopathic terrorists that are trying to kill us, and we do have to realise that whether we like it or not, they have already declared war on us. There isn't a walk-on-by option. There isn't an option of just hoping this will go away.
6 RAF Tornado jets based in Cyprus are expected to be involved in a short burst of attacks in Iraq, potentially followed by more in the weeks to come. The military attacks today by the US-led coalition were in eastern Syria, just over the border, where most of the first wave targets are thought to remain. David Cameron would like to join in those attacks on Syrian targets, but Ed Miliband made it a condition of his support today that they were ruled out for now. And David Cameron knows he couldn't be sure of Lib Dem support if targets were extended to Syria, and that his own backbenches are divided on the issue as well.
The answer does not come from something military that is led by the West. It comes from something political that is led by people within the region.
Given that one of the principles of counterinsurgency is to deny the enemy a home base, isn't it absolutely essential that we back the American efforts in Syria? Otherwise, we will never defeat them in Iraq. And for people to suggest that we can't go to Syria is actually tying our hands behind our backs.
I agree with my honourable friend. President Obama, I think, has been quite open that he is going to, this alliance we're joining, is going to actually launch attacks on ISIS in both Syria and Iraq, and it is quite unrealistic to proceed on any other basis.
US jets yesterday heading for Syria and Iraq. Labour and the coalition agree with the US that combat troops should not be deployed. Ed Miliband, though, said he worried that while the Iraqi army would try to occupy the vacuum left after attacks on Islamic State forces in Iraq, in Syria, no one knew who would benefit.
We can't defeat ISIL by air power alone. Now, in the case of Iraq, it is the Iraqi army and the Kurds who can conduct those operations. There is, I put it no higher than this, there is an outstanding question about who will perform that function in Syria.
One Labour shadow minister resigned, Rushanara Ali. 24 Labour MPs rebelled. One former Labour MP, George Galloway, said US-led airstrikes were a ludicrous approach to the problem.
The last people who should be returning to the scene of their former crimes are Britain, France and the United States of America.
One minister said that over time, the British public would be won over to the idea of attacking Syrian targets. The truth is, no one truly knows what military efforts will be needed, how much time it will take to defeat this very unconventional enemy. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News, Westminster.
Well, just before we came on air, I spoke to the Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond at Westminster, where you'll notice during the interview he was joined by some anti-war protesters. I asked him why Islamic State is a threat to Britain.
3 reasons. Foreign fighters, including many British foreign fighters who, when they leave Iraq, Syria and go back home, will be a threat in their homelands. External threat planning, which we know ISIL is undertaking, seeking to attack Western targets. and thirdly, the stability of the Gulf region, which is very important to our security.
Do you think attacks on British streets are more likely if we are bombing Islamic State militants in Iraq? That seems to stand to reason.
Look, I think what we've seen about ISIL so far is that you can't reason with them. They have no compassion. They have an agenda which is deeply abhorrent. We've seen them executing people without cause, massacring whole populations simply because they disagree with them. We are not going to avoid their poisonous ideology and the consequences of it by looking the other way, by sort of pulling the duvet over our heads and pretending they're not there. That won't make them go away. The only way we're going to deal with them, the only way we're going to keep Britain safe is by engaging with them and destroying them.
If the Iraqi and Kurdish armies fail to defeat Islamic State on the ground, what happens then?
Well, look, the Iraqi army is a significant force, but over the last couple of years, largely because of the sectarian policies pursued by the Maliki government, it has suffered a loss of morale. It does need advising, retraining, restructuring to make it properly effective. And part of what we're doing, it's not just about airstrikes, it's about a broader action to reinforce the Iraqi army with training and equipment and restructuring advice.
But what if they're losing?
Well, look, they've held the line now against ISIL. They were pushed back earlier this year. The airstrikes have tipped the balance on the ground in Iraq.
If they all go over the border to Syria, are we just going to stop there?
Well, that's an important question, and it's been addressed directly in the debate today. We haven't ruled out taking action in Syria in the future, and obviously the US and some of the Arab partners are already doing so. But what we've made clear is that if we decided at any point that that was necessary and appropriate, that Britain could make a contribution that was worth making in Syria, we would go back to the House of Commons, have another debate and another vote.
The trouble is, the same thing applies in Syria. It will need a ground war. Now, right now, Assad is bombing your allies in Syria, the Free Syrian Army.
Well, the situation in Syria is different. And one of the problems that the Free Syrian Army and other moderate armed opposition groups face at the moment is that they're trying to fight a war on two fronts. What the US has done by intervening in Syria is degraded the capability of ISIL to attack the Free Syrian Army and other moderate opposition groups.
So why don't you want to join in that?
Well, look, one step at a time. We've got a request from the Iraqi government to support it in its struggle against ISIL. We may have to look in the future at extending that action into Syria.